75 people were invited, except for me, the only child they erased. My parents chose a blackmailer over their own child to hide a $2 million scandal. They forgot I am an experiential designer. From the mansion across the water, I turned their party into a public disaster exposed to the world on a live stream. The radiator in my Brooklyn apartment hissed like a dying animal, a rhythmic metallic rasp that was the only sound in the room. I sat at my wooden desk, the one I had salvaged from a sidewalk in Williamsburg, watching the blue light of my laptop screen bleed into the shadows of the late afternoon. Outside, the sky over the East River was the color of a bruised plum. Inside, I was staring at an email that had not been meant for me. The subject line was Clinical Harrison Family Summer Retreat Final Logistics and Cabin Assignments. It had been forwarded by a distracted assistant at my father's firm, likely a clerical error born of a shared last name and a lack of attention. I scrolled down. My fingers were cold. My heart began a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I began to count. 1. Sterling, my father, the patriarch who measured love in quarterly dividends. 2. Victoria, my mother, the woman who curated our lives as if they were museum exhibits. 3. Pierce, my older brother, the golden boy of Wall Street. 4. Blair, my sister, the sharp-tongued architect of our family's social standing. 5. Dash, my youngest brother, the one who still hugged me like I was real. 6. Sage, my sister, the one who pretended not to care because caring hurt too much. The list continued. It expanded like a ripple in a dark pond. I saw the names of cousins I had not spoken to in a decade. I saw the names of my siblings, spouses, and their children. I saw the names of distant aunts from Connecticut, and family friends who were only invited to fill the silence with polite laughter. I even saw the name of my father's personal attorney and the woman who groomed Victoria's prize-winning spaniels. 75 names. I scrolled through the list 3 times. I used the search function. I typed my own name, Hayes Harrison. The screen remained blank. No results found. It was a digital execution. I was 32 years old, and I had been deleted from my own lineage. I was the architect who had designed the lighting for their galas. I was the one who had choreographed the very traditions they were about to celebrate at the Breakers in the Hamptons. And yet, I did not exist. The silence in my apartment became deafening. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears after a sudden explosion. I felt the familiar weight of the Manhattan collapse pressing down on me. 2 years ago, I had been the rising star. I had a condo in Soho and a company that was the talk of the design world. Then the market shifted. My partner embezzled our funds. My life evaporated in a weekend. To the Harrisons, failure was contagious. They did not reach out to help. They quarantined me. Suddenly, my phone vibrated on the desk. The haptic feedback sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. It was a text message from Victoria. "I have booked the room with the best ocean view for Chloe," the message read. "She has been under so much stress lately. She needs the salt air to recover. Make sure the lilies are fresh before she arrives." The air left my lungs. Chloe, my ex-wife, the woman who had stayed in the family mansion while I moved into a shoebox in Brooklyn. The woman who had signed the divorce papers with a smirk because she knew she was keeping the Harrison name and the Harrison protection. My mother had not sent that message to me by mistake. She had sent it to an assistant, but the intent was clear. Chloe was still a Harrison. I was a ghost. I leaned back in my chair. My pulse was a frantic drumming in my throat. Thump, thump, thump. I looked around my room. It was filled with remnants of a life that felt like a dream. A single designer lamp, a stack of expensive art books, a framed photograph of the Manhattan skyline that I could no longer afford to live in. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a seat at a table that was never truly mine. I had performed, I had succeeded, I had failed, and the moment I stopped being an asset, I was erased. They were all gathered there, or they soon would be. They would be drinking chilled Sancerre on the deck of the Breakers. They would be laughing about stories that included me while pretending I was never there. They would be looking at Chloe, the interloper who had betrayed me, and they would be calling her family. The betrayal was not just a lack of an invitation. It was the calculated replacement of my presence. It was the realization that my blood was not enough to guarantee my belonging. In the eyes of Victoria and Sterling, I was a broken product. I was a flawed investment. I closed my laptop. The blue light vanished, leaving me in total darkness. I did not move. I did not cry. I did not reach for the phone to scream at my mother. The anger that rose in me was not hot. It was cold. It was precise. It was the kind of anger that builds empires out of ash. They wanted a summer without me. They wanted a picture-perfect retreat where the disappointment of the family was nowhere to be found. They believed that by leaving me off a list, they could remove me from the world. I stood up and walked to the window. Across the water, the lights of the city sparkled like fallen stars. Somewhere out there, the Harrison machine was humming, preparing for their grand display of wealth and unity. They thought they had seen the last of Hayes Harrison. They thought I would stay in Brooklyn and fade into the gray fog of the forgotten. They were wrong. I would not fight for a seat at their table. I would not beg for a room at the Breakers. If they wanted to play a game of appearances, I would show them how the game was truly played. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in a long time. It was time to reach out to Kit. It was time to see if the world was ready for a different kind of Harrison. The scent of white truffles and aged balsamic vinegar always brings back the memory of my last night at the Park Avenue penthouse. It was a month after the collapse of Harrison Design Lab, and the air in the dining room felt as heavy as the velvet curtains I had chosen for my mother 3 years prior. I sat there nursing a glass of wine I could no longer afford, watching the light dance off the silverware. I had designed the lighting system in that room myself. I had spent weeks calibrating the smart dimmers to ensure that the color temperature sat at a perfect 2700 Kelvins, a warm, candlelight glow that was supposed to make people feel safe and connected. Instead, under that very light, I felt like a specimen pinned to a board. My expertise had always been in experiential design. I did not just build rooms, I built memories. I understood how the resonance of a floorboard could influence a person's heart rate, and how the strategic placement of acoustic panels could turn a chaotic gala into an intimate conversation. I was the person the elite called when they wanted their guests to feel a specific emotion without knowing why. I was the architect of the vibe, the silent conductor of the Harrison social machine. But as I looked around the table, I realized that I had failed to design a space where I actually belonged. The downfall had been swift. My business partner had not just stolen money, he had dismantled my reputation by embezzling funds from our most high-profile clients. While I was drowning in legal threats and a crumbling credit score, Chloe had been my supposed anchor. One evening, while my head was spinning from a 12-hour deposition, she had placed a stack of documents in front of me. She told me they were standard legal updates to protect our remaining personal assets from the business creditors. I was exhausted, heartbroken, and desperate to trust the woman I loved. I signed. It was not a protection plan. It was a fraudulent postnuptial agreement. A calculated maneuver that stripped me of my $250,000 stake in our joint investments and waived my rights to the Manhattan property we had spent years renovating. Chloe had seen the ship sinking and decided to build herself a lifeboat out of my wreckage. She did not just leave me, she liquidated me. The brand is what matters, Hayes. My father Sterling said that night, breaking the silence of the dinner. He did not ask if I had enough money for groceries. He did not ask how I was coping with the betrayal. He was looking at his iPad, reviewing the social media engagement for the family's upcoming charity gala. We cannot have your insolvency casting a shadow over the Harrison name. People are starting to ask questions about why you are living in a rental in Brooklyn. It is untidy. It is off-brand. Opposite me, my older brother Pierce adjusted his cuff. The movement was deliberate. His Patek Philippe Nautilus glinted, a masterpiece of brushed steel and sapphire. Crystal caught the overhead light I had so carefully tuned. That watch represented a world of stability and untouchable wealth. It ticked with a mechanical precision that mocked my own chaos. To Pierce, I was no longer a brother. I was a cautionary tale, a glitch in the family's flawless execution. He looked at his watch not to check the time but to signal that my time at their table was running out. The contrast was a physical ache in my chest. Only 3 hours before that dinner, I had stood in a cramped pawnshop in a dusty corner of the city. I had laid out my last set of Leica Summilux lenses on a velvet tray. They were the tools of my trade, the glass through which I captured the textures and light that informed my designs. They were the only things I had left of value. I watched the shop owner inspect them with a magnifying glass, his calloused thumbs smudging the pristine surfaces. I had sold them for a fraction of their worth just to ensure I could pay the next 2 months of rent for my shoebox apartment. My career, my passion, and my history were being traded for survival, while my brother wore the equivalent of a luxury car on his wrist just to check the duration of a family meal. Chloe has been very graceful through all of this. My mother Victoria added her voice as smooth as the silk scarf around her neck. She has managed to maintain her social obligations despite the embarrassment your business failure has caused. We have decided that it is best if she continues to represent the family at the summer retreat. She fits the image we are maintaining. The betrayal was complete. My parents were not just choosing a side, they were choosing a product. Chloe was a polished, functioning asset. I was a broken one. They looked at me and saw a stain on the Harrison tapestry, a variable they could not control or curate. In the world of high-end experiential design, if a component does not fit the aesthetic, you remove it. You replace it with something that works. I looked at Victoria, then at Sterling, and finally at Pierce. The Patek Philippe continued to glint, a silent witness to my erasure. I realized then that my expertise in creating atmospheres had been used against me. They had created an atmosphere of total exclusion, a sensory experience designed to make me feel small, invisible, and unnecessary. They wanted me to fade away into the Brooklyn fog, to become a ghost that they could occasionally mention with a sigh of pity. As I left the penthouse that night, the cold Manhattan air hitting my face, I felt the weight of the lenses I no longer owned. But I also felt something else, a spark of cold, hard clarity. If I was the one who knew how to build a world out of light and sound, then I was the only one who could tear their world down. They thought they had liquidated my life, but they had only stripped away the distractions. I was still the architect, and I was about to design an experience that the Harrison family would never be able to forget. I did not send a bitter email. I did not call Victoria to scream about the room she had given to Chloe. I did not engage in the petty warfare of the Harrison family. Instead, I sat in the dim light of my Brooklyn apartment and made 2 phone calls. The first was to Kit, a master of spatial audio who could make a garden sound like a cathedral. The second was to Silas, a man who understood the logistics of luxury better than anyone I had ever met. I am building a stage, I told them, and I need you to help me light it. We met at a small coffee shop in Dumbo. I laid out the map of the Hamptons. My family was anchored at the Breakers, a massive traditional estate that represented everything rigid and old-fashioned about the Harrison name. Directly across the narrow inlet sat a property called Luna Bay. It was a modern architectural marvel made of cantilevered glass and reclaimed cedar. It was positioned perfectly to catch the reflection of the moon on the water, and more importantly, it was positioned to be seen by every single person standing on the deck of the Breakers. The rental listing for Luna Bay was astronomical. It was $60,000 for the week, a figure that was impossible for a man who had just sold his camera lenses to pay rent, but I had noticed the name of the holding company in the fine print of the listing, Vance Properties. I called the owner of the firm, directly bypassing the rental agents. When the man on the other end answered, I recognized the voice immediately. It was Julian Vance. 10 years ago, Julian was a struggling gallery owner in Chelsea. He was on the verge of losing everything when I offered to design the lighting for his final show. I had worked for 48 hours straight using discarded industrial fixtures and hand-tinted gels to create an atmosphere that made his modest gallery feel like a world-class institution. That show was a massive success. It was the moment Julian Vance became the titan he was today. "Hayes Harrison," Julian said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I have wondered when you would call me." I heard about what happened in Manhattan. I also heard what your family has been saying about your exit from the business. I told him the truth. I told him I needed a place to stand not for revenge but to reclaim the narrative of my own life. I told him I wanted to rent Luna Bay. You gave me my career, Hayes, Julian replied, his tone shifting to something deeply sincere. You saw the potential in my space when no one else would look at it. You do not owe me $60,000. You do not even owe me 60 cents. I will have the keys delivered to your apartment this afternoon. Pay me $1 for the legalities. The house is yours. Just show the world that the heartbeat of the Harrison family did not stay at the breakers. This was the first time in 2 years that the wind had been at my back. With the symbolic payment made, I had a stage that was even more prestigious than the one I had been exiled from. Kit Silas and I arrived at Luna Bay under the cover of a coastal mist. While my family was busy polishing their silver and rehearsing their polite smiles at the breakers, we were busy working. We were not just unpacking bags, we were installing an experience. As an expert in experiential design, I knew that the most powerful way to attract attention was not through noise, but through frequency. I designed a lighting program for the exterior of Luna Bay that I called the Lunar Pulse. I used high-output narrow-beam projectors to wash the cedar walls in a deep, oscillating amber. It was a color that sat at the exact frequency of a summer sunset, a light that triggered a biological response of calm and curiosity in anyone who saw it. Kit installed a subterranean sound system along the shoreline. We did not play loud music. Instead, we broadcasted a low-frequency ambient track that mimicked the sound of the tide, but with a rhythmic sub-bass that felt like a heartbeat. You could not hear it from a distance, but you could feel it in your chest if you were standing anywhere near the water. By the second night, the transformation was complete. Luna Bay was no longer just a house, it was a beacon. Across the water, the breakers looked stiff and frozen under its traditional harsh yellow floodlights. It looked like a museum where the exhibits were dying. Luna Bay, however, looked alive. It breathed, it pulsed. We began to see the binoculars from the other side of the inlet. I saw the shadows of my cousins and siblings standing on the deck of the breakers, pointing toward us. They were wondering who had moved into the most expensive house on the coast. They were wondering why the vibe over there felt so much more magnetic than the one they were currently enduring. I stood on the dock of Luna Bay, a glass of water in my hand, watching the amber light play across the waves. I was no longer the failed son hiding in Brooklyn. I was the architect of the most talked-about space in the Hamptons. The magnet was working. The gravity of the coast was shifting toward me, and my family had no idea that the negativity they had tried to quarantine was about to become the only thing their guests wanted to experience. I had built my own table. Now, I just had to wait for them to realize they were sitting at the wrong one. The air at Luna Bay did not just carry the sound of jazz, it carried a frequency of liberation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the amber glow of the lunar pulse shifted into a sophisticated ultraviolet and soft neon palette. It was a visual symphony designed to enhance the natural architectural lines of the glass and cedar. I had filled the ventilation system with a custom diffused scent of aged sandalwood and sea salt and olfactory anchor that grounded the guests while the music lifted them. It was the absolute pinnacle of my experiential design career, a space that felt both expansive and intimate. The migration began around 9 o'clock. From the terrace of Luna Bay, I watched the small white boats and jet skis depart from the dock of the breakers. My family's guests were abandoning the rigid, formal dinner of my mother's creation. They were being pulled across the water by the sheer gravity of the atmosphere we had built. The first to arrive were Dash and Sage. My youngest brother looked like he had finally been allowed to breathe after being submerged in ice water. He stepped onto the dock, his eyes wide as he took in the oscillating light and the rhythmic heartbeat of the bus. "Hayes," Dash said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a rescue. "The Breakers is a morgue. Victoria is counting how many seconds people spend at the buffet, and Sterling is lecturing the cousins on market volatility. We saw the lights from across the bay. Everyone is talking about this place." Sage followed her usual defensive posture, softening as she inhaled the sandalwood. They told us you were in Denver on a business trip, Hayes. They said you were too busy to come to the retreat. Why would they lie about that? I looked at my sister, seeing the genuine confusion in her eyes. Because in their world, Sage, a person who fails at business, is a person who no longer exists. They did not want to explain my absence, so they chose to overwrite my reality. Within the hour, the deck was filled with the younger generation of the Harrison clan. The laughter was authentic, not the practiced, polite tittering of a Manhattan gala. Silas was managing the bar with the grace of a chemist, and Kit was at the soundboard live mixing the ambient tracks to match the rising energy of the crowd. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the triumph. I had proven that my worth was not tied to my bank account, but to my ability to move the human spirit. However, the triumph was short-lived. I walked back toward the interior control room to adjust the acoustic feedback loops. Kit had installed high-fidelity directional microphones along the perimeter of the property to assist with spatial sound calibration, a system designed to cancel out the noise of the wind while amplifying the music. I put on the headphones to check the levels of the south-facing sensors, which were aimed toward the private garden path that connected the dock to the main house. The music in the headphones faded as I isolated the channel, but what replaced it was not the sound of the wind. It was the sound of a heated, low-pitched argument. "I'm not going to wait until the end of the summer, Pierce," a voice hissed. It was Chloe. The cold, melodic tone that had once whispered promises to me was now sharpened like a razor. "The Foundation's audit is scheduled for September. If the $2 million is not back in the accounts by then, I am taking my evidence to the district attorney." I froze. My hand stayed hovered over the soundboard. "You have no idea what you are playing with, Chloe," Pierce's voice replied. It lacked its usual Wall Street bravado. It sounded hollow, desperate, and terrifyingly thin. The embezzlement was a temporary move to cover the losses from the offshore accounts. Sterling knows, Victoria knows. We are a family. We protect our own. "No," Chloe countered, and I could almost hear her smirk. "You protect your brand. And right now, your brand is built on a $2 million hole in a children's charity fund. Victoria keeps me around because I am the only thing standing between you and a federal prison cell. She does not love me, Pierce. She is terrified of me. That view of the ocean she gave me, that was not a gift. It was hush money." The silence that followed was more chilling than the words themselves. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The contrast was staggering. 20 feet away, my friends and siblings were dancing under neon lights, celebrating what they thought was a beautiful, reclaimed life. But in the shadows of that same property, the perfect Harrison family was rotting from the inside out. The betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined. My mother had not chosen Chloe over me because she was graceful or on brand. She had chosen Chloe because my ex-wife was a blackmailer who held the keys to my brother's freedom. They had erased me and replaced me with a predator, all to maintain the illusion of a flawless dynasty. They were not a family. They were a criminal enterprise disguised as an institution. I stood in the dark control room, the headphones still pressing against my ears. The heartbeat of the house continued to pulse, thump, 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 but it no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a ticking clock. Pierce, the brother with the Patek Philippe and the untouchable reputation, was a thief. My mother, the woman who lectured me on the off-brand nature of my bankruptcy, was a co-conspirator. They had treated my honest failure as a sin while treating their own crimes as a logistical inconvenience. I looked through the glass at the party. I saw Dash laughing. I saw Sage finally smiling. They were the collateral damage of a legacy built on lies. I reached out and pressed the record button on the digital interface. I was no longer just the architect of the vibe. I was now the custodian of the truth. The Harrison family wanted to stay in the shadows fine. I would give them all the light they could handle. The humidity of the night had vanished, replaced by a crisp electric clarity that only exists when a storm is about to break. Luna Bay was glowing a translucent jewel of amber and ultraviolet perched above the dark Atlantic. My experiential design was functioning at its absolute peak. The heartbeat of the subbase was synchronized with the gentle lapping of the waves, creating a sensory loop that made every guest feel as though they were part of the shoreline itself. The front gates chimed a low, resonant frequency that I had programmed to cut through the music without causing alarm. I did not need to look at the security monitors to know who had arrived. The energy of the room shifted. It was a cold front moving into a tropical zone. Victoria and Sterling Harrison stepped onto the terrace. They were dressed in the armor of the old-world Sterling and a bespoke navy blazer with gold buttons. Victoria in a structured white sheath dress that looked like it had been carved from marble. They did not walk. They invaded. Behind them, Pierce and Chloe followed, their faces tight with a mixture of arrogance and burgeoning panic. "Hayes," Victoria said, her voice projecting with the practiced volume of a woman used to commanding charity boardrooms. She did not look at the art, the lighting, or the joy on the faces of her youngest children. She looked only at me. "This performance has gone on long enough. You are causing a scene. You are confusing the family. It is time for everyone to return to the breakers for the traditional toast. Now." The 75 guests, the elite of the Hamptons and Manhattan, went silent. The only sound was the ambient pulse of the house. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply stood behind the sleek, glass-topped control console I had integrated into the bar. "I am not performing Mother," I said, my voice steady. "I am simply providing an experience, and I believe the most important part of any experience is the truth." I adjusted a single fader on the console. Because I had designed Luna Bay with state-of-the-art acoustic reflection technology, the glass walls were not just windows. They were massive, high-fidelity speakers. By utilizing hyperdirectional audio, I could project a sound to a specific point in the room with absolute precision. I triggered the playback from the recording I had made in the control room only 20 minutes prior. The argument between Chloe and Pierce began to resonate throughout the terrace. It did not sound like a recording. It sounded as if they were standing in the center of the crowd, their voices intimate and terrifyingly clear. "The Foundation's audit is scheduled for September." Chloe's voice rang out cold and predatory. "If the $2 million is not back in the accounts by then, I am taking my evidence to the district attorney." The crowd gasped. I saw Sterling's face drain of color, turning the gray of wet cement. The embezzlement was a temporary move. Pierce's voice followed, echoing against the glass. "Sterling knows. Victoria knows. We protect our own." The silence that followed the recording was heavier than any sound I had ever created. Chloe froze her hand, gripping her designer clutch so hard her knuckles turned white. Pierce looked around the room, his eyes darting from guest to guest, looking for a way to delete the reality he had just confirmed. Victoria stepped forward, her mouth opening to deliver a devastating rebuke to spin the narrative to save the brand. "This is a fabrication," she cried, her voice cracking for the first time in my life. "This is a desperate technical glitch from a son who has lost his mind." But it was too late. In the world of the ultra-wealthy, information is the only currency that matters. I looked out at the guests, the influencers, the CEOs, the journalists, and the socialites. They were not looking at Victoria with sympathy. They were holding their phones. Dozens of screens were lit up. The blue light of their devices mirrored the neon of the house. They were not just recording, they were live streaming. The perfect Harrison family was being dismantled in real-time broadcast to millions of followers before Victoria could even finish her sentence. The carefully curated image that she had spent 30 years building was evaporating in a digital cloud. "Turn it off!" Sterling roared at me, but he was not looking at me. He was looking at the phones. He saw the world watching. He saw the stock price of his firm beginning to tremble. He saw the end of his legacy. I ignored him. I walked away from the console and stepped toward the edge of the balcony. Victoria followed me, her heels clicking frantically against the stone. "Hayes! Stop this. Think about the family name. Think about what you are doing to us." I finally turned to look at her, but I did not see the powerful woman who had ruled my life. I saw a stranger who had traded her son for a polished facade. I saw a designer who had run out of materials to hide the cracks in her work. "I am not doing anything to you, Victoria," I said quietly. "I am just letting the light in. You were the one who told me that the brand is what matters. This is your brand. It is just finally honest." She began to speak, her voice a frantic whisper of pleas and threats, but I stopped listening. I turned my back on her. I turned my back on Sterling, on Pierce, and on the wreckage of the Harrison name. I walked to the very edge of the glass railing and looked out at the water of Luna Bay. The ocean was black, vast, and indifferent to the drama unfolding behind me. The moonlight hit the surface in long, shimmering strokes of silver. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to calibrate the light. I did not need to design the vibe. I did not need to earn a seat at a table that was built on a foundation of theft and silence. The chaos of the party, the shouting, the ringing of phones, and the crumbling of an empire felt 1,000 miles away. Here, on the edge of the water, the air was cool and clean. I inhaled deeply, the scent of salt and sandalwood filling my lungs. I was not the failed son. I was not the deleted name on a list. I was Hayes Harrison, and I was finally absolutely free. The headlines faded after 12 days, but the damage was irreversible. The Harrison family became a shorthand for institutional deceit in the Manhattan financial journals. My brother Pierce is currently navigating a long legal battle, and Victoria's social standing has vanished into the shadows of her own making. They reached out to me, of course. There were frantic phone calls and handwritten letters filled with promises of a restored position and a formal seat on the board. They wanted me to use my new influence to help them curate a redemption arc. I did not answer. I was no longer interested in repairing a house that was built on rot. Instead, I focused on the momentum I had built at Luna Bay. The world of luxury design had shifted. People were no longer looking for sterile perfection. They were looking for the very thing I had discovered in the darkness of Brooklyn: authenticity. I launched a new firm, Harrison Experiential, focusing on retreats that prioritize human connection over social performance. My expertise in atmosphere was no longer a tool for deception, but a bridge for genuine experience. With the first major profits from my firm, I did not buy a penthouse in Soho or a mansion in the Hamptons. I went back to a small pre-war building in the Upper West Side. I bought my grandmother's old apartment. It is a space filled with the scent of dried lavender and the creak of original oak floors. The only place in my childhood where the light was never artificial and the warmth was never conditional. It is not a museum of wealth. It is a sanctuary of truth. When I look at the mahogany dining table in that apartment, I do not see a place where names are erased or lists are curated. I see a space where everyone is seen. I have spent my life trying to earn a seat at a table that was designed to exclude me. I realize now that the struggle was my greatest teacher. It taught me that belonging is not something granted by others. It is something you cultivate within yourself. My message to you is simple. Do not waste your life trying to win a seat at a table that does not value your soul. Do not beg for an invitation from people who only love the version of you that fits their frame. Instead, take your skills, your pain, and your truth, and build your own table. Build a space where the truth is the main dish and integrity is the only requirement for entry. When you build from a place of honesty, you do not just survive. You become a beacon for those who are still wandering in the dark. I have shared my story not to seek pity, but to show you that being erased by your family is often the first step toward being truly found by yourself. I would love to hear from you. Have you ever been the black sheep who had to find their own way? Tell me your story in the comments about how you stood your ground after a betrayal. Let us remind each other that we are never truly alone when we stand in our own truth. Thank you for listening.